you. Thank you, Christina. Thanks to the board and to the Waterwell Association. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anthony Creech. I work in the central Office of Environmental Health Services with the Department of Health. And I came to the Department of Health back in 2017 as the private well program director. I've since become environmental technical programs manager, and Scott Vogel is the key first stop shopping for private well issues. Anytime there's any question about our end of things, you're always welcome to contact us. I'm pretty sure I have my contact information at the end of this PowerPoint, which I'll share with Christina so she can share with everybody. And if not, I'll just include the contact information. So what I'm here to do today is offer you an update on where we stand with updating the private well regulations, an update, I guess you'd call it. And also maybe a little bit of discussion about other things that we're thinking about here at the Department of Health regarding private wells as we move forward into the 21st century. So let me see, all these programs are different. Share screen, here we go. And I want to share this one. So is everyone seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay.
It's in the presenter view though, Anthony, if you want to turn it into the.
Okay, so I got to remember how I do that.
If you go to. Actually, it's when you share your screen, go ahead and press like the slideshow button, and then the screen that pops up to turn it into a slideshow, you want to share that screen. Right now you're sharing your desktop, which is fine.
Yeah, I know there's another this has come up to us before. That's not telling me to print. That's no good. Let me try this. Oh, man. I had this all queued up, ready to go, and now I got to go back and find it again. Okay. What are you guys seeing? You still seeing the presentation view?
Just you, actually.
Okay, so we're good to go. All right, thanks. Sorry about that, folks.
Well, it's just you. We don't see your presentation.
Oh, man.
I think you just have to reshare your screen, the slideshow.
Yeah, I tell you.
There you go. Now, if you want to put that into the slideshow mode, or if you just want to work through those.
How's that?
Yes, sir. We got it.
Okay. So yeah, give you a little bit of a private update, a private well regulations update, where we are in this particular process. As most of you know, the original regulation goes back to September 1988. It had its first major revision in 1990, and that's pretty much the one we're still working with today. There's been some minor revisions since, but that's because of actions done by the General Assembly, not by the Department of Health. We knew it was a little outdated, needed to be brought into the future. So we formed a work group, stakeholder group back in 2016 to start thinking about what needed to be revised, updated, modernized in the regulation. Worked together for a couple of years. We published a notice of intended regulatory action in October of 2018, and there were no public comments received. That's pretty typical. It didn't show any new draft language, anything had changed. It was just a announcement saying, a regulation is about to be created or amended, and that's all it says. So we finalized the draft when the NORA ended, no public comments. We finalized the draft regulation, sent it to the Board of Health in June of 2019. They approved it. The Attorney General then has to take a look at it and make sure we're not, inconsistent with any laws anywhere up to and including the Constitution. They reviewed it. They were done in July of 2019. Planning and Budget, Department of Planning and Budget has to review it. I guess they're the gatekeepers of all state taxpayer funds, and they wanted to make sure there was anything there that they needed to know about. So they reviewed it. They were done by August 15th. Then it goes to the Secretary of Health and Human Resources, and they reviewed it, approved it September 3rd, 2019. None of them had any changes whatsoever to the draft regulation. In fact, I think one of them, I think the Planning and Budget had a question, but we just answered the question. It didn't result in any change of the text. Then it went to the Governor's Office for review, which is the last stage prior to being released to the public for public comment. And then there was a little something called COVID-19 that happened. And pretty much, I don't think the Governor's Office did anything in 2020 or the last 9 months of 2020 and the first maybe 3 or 4 months of this year that was not directly related to COVID-19 response. I mean, we just didn't even think about it. As of yesterday, according to Town Hall, Virginia Town Hall, the draft private well regulation still is under Governor's Office review. And in fact, on September 3rd, just a couple of weeks from now, it will be a 2-year mark that's been sitting in the Governor's Office. A little side note about that, I think Joe Hilbert, who is the Deputy Commissioner in charge of governmental affairs, has sort of politely asked the Governor's Office if they can, move this along. It's an important public health thing and so on. But there's very limited things that we as a department can do in terms of, trying to contact the Governor's Office. It's just our role is to just wait for this stage of government to happen and then continue the process. But any citizen or professional organization or so on, if they want to wonder why this is still sitting there, I mean, sometimes I think the governors may even listen to that more than they will our deputy commissioner's polite sort of nudge. So all I can tell you is it's still sitting there waiting to be released for public comment. When that happens, it will, there'll be an announcement. It'll go on the Virginia Town Hall. It's actually there right now. Anyone can, read the text of the draft regulation right now. And I'm happy to, you kind of have to hunt around Town Hall like Sherlock Holmes to find it. But I'm happy to share the link if there's interest in taking a look at it now. But when it goes to Town Hall, there's a 60-day public comment period. And after that, our stakeholder group will sort of get back together again, review the public comments, decide if any of them, really have any sort of significant logic to them that would say, yeah, you know, we need to tweak this part of the regulation or add that or delete this. Then I can't remember if it goes to the Board of Health again. I don't think it does. There's a couple of convoluted steps, but they're usually rubber stamps, and then it goes out for public comment for another 30 days. And then there has to be like an awful lot of public comment on a single issue to make any change at that point. And then it will become the new regulation, you know, after that 30-day period is up. So, you know, even if it gets approved by the governor's office today, we're still looking at probably towards early to mid 2022 before it would become the new regulation. So we'll see. So yeah, two-year birthday is coming up September 3rd. We actually have that marked on our calendars here, you know, just in case we want to grit our teeth a little more. I mean, you know, this process always takes a long time. This one seems to be really taking a long time. COVID was obviously a part of that, but I mean, hopefully we'll see something soon. So in terms of what is being changed in the regulation, there's you know, a lot of changes to definitions, primarily so they'll be consistent with the same definition in other regulations, whether they're ours or you know, the building code or DEQ or whatever. And I'm going to talk about these a little bit more as we go along. The classes of water wells, there's a slight tweak there. The sections are going to be reorganized. It just never made sense to me that, you know, it makes sense for the regulation to proceed the way a well is constructed. And so, you know, right now we had water quality before any of the construction stuff, and that just didn't make sense to me. You don't check the water quality until after you have a completed well. So a little bit of reorganization. A lot of changes to table 3.1, some additions and some changes. I'll talk about those in a little bit. A little bit about the materials wells are constructed with. That's primarily getting rid of obsolete things that are in the regulation now. Some stuff about construction, some significant stuff about well abandonment, and then other things, you know, we're trying to get away from saying he, you know, there's one, it's either a spelling or grammatical error in the private well regulations that I know of. And I can't remember where it is, but we got rid of that. And then, you know, like 7,000 people look at these to make sure there's no misspellings or, you know, stuff like that. And then also where we're inconsistent with other regulations or references to the Code of Virginia and so on and so forth, we get rid of those things. So what to look for in definitions. Like I said, we've added several, we've modified some, we got rid of one. The one we got rid of, I think, might have been confined aquifer. It's something that is never referenced anywhere in the regulation itself, so it didn't need to be defined. You know, but a lot of changes there. They're worth looking at. In terms of permits, the largest change, you know, currently a well permit is goes for 54 months. That's going to be changed so that it's consistent with an on-site system permit. It will be an 18-month permit with a provision for 1 18-month renewal. I mentioned that the classes of water wells, the big change that we're talking about is we're revising so that class 4, which are the non-potable wells, they'll basically mirror the class 3. So you have a class 4 well, it's an irrigation well, or it's just not intended for portable use. Well, you know, it'll be a 3A, a 4A if it's, you know, constructed the same way as a 3A, a 4B constructed the same way as a 3B. And the reason for doing this is that sometimes people have an old class 4 well and they want to use it for portable use. And right now, it's allowed to happen, but it's a little bit sometimes of a convoluted process. You know, depending on how the well is constructed, whether it can be allowed, depending on, there's a water quality test that's required. If by having the, the class 4 construction standards simply mirror class 3, and, doesn't matter whether it's drilled or bored, as far as a 3C, it just makes it so that if someone wants to make that transformation, it can easily happen. It's like, absolutely, you got a 4B well, you want to use a pool of water, do a bacteria test, you're good to go. So that's our purpose there. In terms of well location, the table 3.1, we kind of revised the format of the table. As you know, there's like a whole bunch of footnotes in that table that can make it kind of confusing depending on where you are in it, figuring out what you're supposed to do. Because you read something and then there's a little asterisk or a little 1, I think, and you go down, you read that, and there's 2, and it's, we got rid of all those footnotes. We reorganized the table to clarify that. We've added some additional setbacks that'll be consistent with other regulations. And these are sort of unusual things, like, I'm trying to think of one of the new ones. It's the, should have had a regulation, draft regulation open. But there are things, that there's like reclamation water pipes, things like that, you might come across once in a career. But, rather than say, well, they're supposed to be this far from a well, so do the same thing, we're including those in the regulations. A really important one is that the setback from termite treated foundations in the new regulation is going to be discontinued. There'll be nothing to do with termite treated foundations. Doesn't matter, you don't have to think about it. However, in doing that, the distance from a building foundation itself is going to change from 10 to 15 feet. So 15 feet from all building foundations, no matter what, and then you don't have to worry about termite treatment at all. That's a constant headache. That part of the regulation dates back to when termite chemicals were horrible, nasty, things, and they're still horrible and nasty, but they're much better controlled, and they don't represent the same danger to a private well that the old ones did. And we did an awful lot of study about what about the older houses that were treated with the bad stuff, and so we're quite comfortable scientifically based that with a 15-foot setback from a foundation and not worrying about termite treatments. Then there's that whole issue of wells adjacent to agricultural properties, 3 acres or more. We've added a lot of clarification there. In terms of well materials, we're trying to get away from prescriptive standards and as much as possible. So we're basically, identifying National Sanitation Foundation, ASTM, so on, what must apply, not getting into, specific pipe thickness or anything of that. That's your job, not ours. We just, clarify what the standards your materials have to comply with. We've added issues talking about drilling fluids, the water you use, your disinfection compounds. There's going to be no coal combustion byproducts allowed in grout. And so those are pretty much the big changes as far as well materials that you will see. For well construction, we've added some subsections just addressing the, drilling the hole itself, the filter pack, development of the well, maintenance and repair. Not a whole lot. We don't want to be prescriptive. We just want to, again, this is just what's anticipated as the minimum standard for these things. And I think, those of you who do, water, big pipe drilling for public water supplies, those kind of jobs, also, there's a lot more well construction stuff in the private well regulations now, and even as we go forward, than there is in the waterworks regulation. And the reason for that is the waterworks references the AWWA A100 standard. And if you try to build a residential drinking water well to the A100 standard, that'd be a mighty expensive well, so there's not really a comparable national standard that can be referenced for private wells. So we've tried to bridge the gap there without stepping on too many toes, but we just want to make clear, you can't use, coal ash in your grout. You can't, your filter sand needs to meet this standard, that type of thing. As far as well abandonment, one thing is to clarify what constitutes clean fill. I'll talk about that a little bit in a second, but also, again, no coal combustion products and grout used in well abandonment. And then to provide an alternate method for abandoning bored wells, such as they can be declassified as wells with respect to separation distance. I don't know that you guys deal with this that much, but anyone who does, also gets in the on-site, septic tank and drain fields and all that stuff. The way the reg is written is, you could abandon a bored well, but you still have to think of it as a well when you're siting like a drain field repair or a new drain field or anything like that. I think the purpose of that was to come up with a less expensive method, going back to like 1988 when the regs were first written. The purpose was to try to have a less expensive method of well abandonment that would encourage well abandonment. But that's a really, the fact that it's still a well is an unintended consequence. We're the only state I am aware of that has such a requirement that doesn't consider an abandoned well just no longer a well. So the existing bored well abandonment method is still there, but we also have developed another abandonment method which will allow the well to no longer be considered a well for that purpose. And so I think that will be a useful thing, especially on the small lot sites when they have an on-site system repair. That an abandoned well still being considered a well can really limit the options. Now, going back to the clean fill thing, I defy anyone to find a nationally recognized standard as to what clean fill means. It means one thing for gardener, or something else for builders, something else for people that operate landfills. I mean, there's no one answer. So we've done our best to come up with something that just will keep unpleasant things that shouldn't be put into a well as part of well abandonment. And so I think we did a good job, but we will wait to see what the public has to say about that as well. It's just a clarification. So again, as I noted, the regulation sequence has been restructured so that regulatory information is presented in the order that wells are constructed. It just always drove me crazy that you had to flip back and forth, instead of going, okay, you do this, then you do that, then you do this, then you do that. Again, clarified. This probably doesn't pertain to most of you guys unless you're in the geotechnical environmental field also, but monitoring and observation wells that are used around gas stations and landfills and hazardous waste sites and stuff, those are DEQ's world. And for reasons that go back to the Groundwater Act of 1973, Department of Health has no involvement whatsoever in monitoring wells, except that they shall be abandoned when they're no longer used. And we're just clarifying that we mean permanent abandonment as opposed to temporary abandonment, because the idea is, to protect groundwater from surface water infiltration. If the thing's absolutely not being used, then just say, well, we're not using it, but we might later, is not good enough. And then, those of you who work in the coastal plain know that their DEQ regulates groundwater management, especially for anyone who's taking more than 300,000 gallons a month out of any, like one well or a bunch of wells together. And so we're just clarifying the reference to that in our regulation. So this is what we hope. We hope that the new regulations will provide some clarity, provide more options to homeowners, like I said, getting rid of the termite treatment headache and getting rid of the abandoned board well is still a well thing, things like that. It certainly provides better consistency to other regulations and other agencies. What our current regulation says about our regulation with D4, for example, is just meaningless anymore with the changes to D4. And most importantly, we believe it increases the protection of public health and groundwater resources. So as far as the private well regulations, that's where we're at. I honestly thought when we turned these into the governor in September of 2019 that there would be new private well regulations in place now in August of 2021, but they're not. They're still in the governor's office waiting the chance to go to public review. It's honestly a little frustrating on our end. We'd like to get these out there. We'd like to have to stop having to process variances all the time because a well was installed, and then the contractor who's building the house, the only thing he cares about the driller is that he shows up on time and doesn't overcharge. That's the only thing the builder cares about. And then they hire some termite treatment person that causes, well, now you've got a well too close for a termite treated foundation and you have to write variances to correct it. So we really want to get rid of all these obsolete things. I honestly think that this will improve the world of the driller. I'll let you guys tell me if it doesn't. I'm sure you will and you should. But that's where we are. It's currently somewhere in the governor's office in some state of review before it can go to public comment, and then we have several stages to go through then. The hard parts, the heavy lifting's done, but we still have a little way to go. So with that, does anyone, before I move on to some of the other things that we're doing here in the health department, does anyone have any questions about anything to do with this proposed change to the well regulation?
Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to speak, or if you do write a question in the chat box, I'll relay it to Anthony. But Anthony, I did have two questions of my own. So in reference to the classifications of wells and treating the class 4 wells like the class 3 wells, are we getting rid of the class 4 altogether?
No, there's going to be class 4. It'll just be, there'll be a class 4A, class 4B, and a class 4C. And then there won't be just a plain class 4. Now,
Okay.
Obviously, there are hundreds of thousands, at least, class 4 wells out there right now that are just class 4. We're not going to go back and like reclassify any of those. This will just be like a moving forward thing.
And what does the A, B, and C distinguish?
The A and those A, B, and C distinguish the minimum amount of casing and the minimum amount of grout that's in wells. So a class 3A has at least 100 feet of casing and at least 20 feet of grout, and that's really like a coastal plain, shifting sand kind of well construction. Class 3B well has a minimum of 50 feet of casing. And,
Sorry, so I thought you meant that class 4 would have 3 different classes, A, B, and C. Class 4.
right, they'll be the same. So class 4A will be constructed exactly the same way as a class 3A well.
Gotcha. Okay, and then so in
It
the
just won't have, it won't need the water quality sample because it's not going to be used for potable purposes.
Okay. And is class 4 already established with a class 4A, 4B, and 4C to where it's indicative of the type of well they're constructing it for, such as like, is there a distinguish between, a livestock, or what's the element in between 4A, 4B, and 4C that gives that the different classification?
Simply the casing and grout. A class 4 well, whether it's A, B, or C, is just not intended for potable use.
Okay, I guess I was referring more to the purpose of saying a 4A or 4B, 4C. What purpose, other than the well casing depth and the grouting?
The purpose is that, it's not uncommon. I mean, it doesn't happen every day, but we get people come into the health department and say, I've got a class 4 well that I'd like to use, like my drinking water wells run dry, and I've got a class 4 well over here. I'd like to hook up my house water supply to it. And, we let them do it but we have to look at the well construction, and they have to do a bacteriological test. This way, all they have to do is a bacteriological test. We don't have to, try to find dig up the GW2 or anything else to figure out what's going on in the well. So it's just to make that simple request easier.
Sorry, and I don't think I must be communicating my question because I understand that totally. So I'll move on to my next question, maybe get clarification from you later on what I'm trying to get an answer on.
Sure.
The second one is the well abandonment. Do we have an idea or understanding what that alternate method to abandon to be able to declassify that well as a well? What does that look like or entail?
It basically requires, it's basically grouted all the way from bottom to top. It's not this mix of clean fill with bentonite plugs and all that stuff. And it also requires taking care of the upper 20 feet of outside the casing. So you either have to, you have to grout that up too. And there's the mechanism by which you can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to get into all the technical details, but I'm happy to.
Okay. All right. Well, those were my 2 questions. Let's see what was in the chat box. So a comment, looks like it's the change. Do you see one? Okay.
Yeah, I see. So the change is lack protection for the drillers. We're now required to do permitting, but there's nothing that says someone isn't going to hire us just to get their permit. You weren't going to change regulations. Why not help your drillers? Actually, drillers are not required. They're just allowed to. The way this came about is that when the state went to privatization, so that we are getting out of the designing septic tanks and drain fields and leaving that to the private sector. And this all came from the General Assembly and changes to the Code of Virginia. It allowed on-site soil evaluators, audited on-site soil evaluators, and PEs to, do those things and write the permits and do the site visits and the sanitary survey and all that. So that happened, I think, in like 2016, 2017, something like that. And we're currently in the middle of a 5-year transition to the private sector for this. The reason that drillers were added is because drillers wanted to be added. I said, why can't we, site a well? Why can't we do the sanitary survey for a well permit? So that made sense. And I'd have to go back and look. I don't know if that was, I think that was actually changed in the Code of Virginia. So, well, the clear thing is drillers are not required to do the permits. It's just an option that they're allowed to. And
exactly, we had a voice in that and saying that we didn't want to be regulated out of being able to have that option. We didn't want to be able to just have AOSEs and sanitarians or Department of Health be the only entities when we as water well professionals are able and capable of that.
Yeah. And I see I'm a PG. I got a professional geologist certification from the state. I'm not allowed to do this. PG, I mean, that makes no sense, but the geologists are not, pounding down the doors of the General Assembly asking for the authority. And one of the things that we have found, which was surprised us, it's interesting, I don't know if it's changed, but actually the OSCs and so on that they really fought really hard to be able to do the surveys and for the on-site systems. A lot of them don't like doing the wells. They'll do the here's the package for the on-site system, and Department of Health, you pick where you want the well to go. They don't like to get involved with wells. So, still a lot of these are still going to be done by the health department. But yeah, that's my understanding. And yeah, drillers are not required to. You just have the option to. You have the ability to. You're not excluded from being able to, as was the case a few years ago. Can't do that when the water's still full. Road is impossible. There's always going to be situations where something's not going to work. The existing way of abandoning a bored well is still there. This is just an option available to allow another method of bored well abandonment. A lot of things in the new regulations that are different from the old are actually don't replace the old. They provide an additional method. And I'll give you another example of that. Disinfection, after you drill the well, you're supposed to, the little table there, and you chlorinate the well before you can take your bacteriological sample. You still do it that way, but then there's another process that's going to be allowed also. I just want to make clear that in some of these cases where I'm saying, yeah, we're doing this new and different, we're not taking away the old, we're adding, you can do this or that, you get a choice. Because we realize that, we shouldn't be saying there's just only one way of doing this. Technology changes. There may be something that comes along 5 years from now that is a better way of doing things, and we don't want to prevent drillers from being able to embrace new technology just because we have something in our reg that says you can only do it this way. So that's kind of how we're trying to do this. Link for the regulation changes. Yeah, I can dig that up and I'll share it with Christina and she can get it out to you. It's there on Town Hall, but you have to hunt for it. Then it should be my permit like West Virginia does. I'm not sure I understand that. Maybe I'm great with it and do who owns a permit. So I guess the concern is you go out, you do a sanitary survey, and then they hire someone else to drill the well. Is that the concern?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. You know, I don't know that, I'm not sure how, West Virginia gives the permit to the driller. If the owner changes drillers, they pay for a new health department. Well, that's an, I'll look into how West Virginia does it. But that I may have to, you know, confer with our folks over at the AG's office, because the yeah, that's a very good thing, application stuff. I mean, everything we do in Virginia is to the owner. It's to the owner. And usually, I'm trying to think. So like in a new house, typically the builder is the owner, and then everything goes, when they sell the house, it goes to whoever buys the house. I don't know. I'll look into that. There may be something in the Code of Virginia that dictates whether we could do that or not, but very interesting question. I'm happy to look into that, the way that West Virginia does it.
Thank you, Anthony. I think that was all the questions we had at the time.
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, most of what you're talking about deals with the drillers, but there are information that's applicable to the homeowner. And I'm just wondering, well, can you put out a guideline for homeowners so that they're aware of these certain aspects, like you were talking about transfer from, you know, like an agriculture well to a home well or well abandonment? There are certain things that well owner or homeowners, you know, they're not going to go through and read these entire regulations to pick out the important points as far as what they're concerned. Can you summarize, you know, what's relevant for homeowners, and maybe reference the sections, or just kind of present well, what a summary?
I'm sure we will do that. There'll be, typically when a regulation gets revised, there'll be several things. One will be what's called a crosswalk document, and that will go out to the professionals. And what that typically is okay, this used to be in section 380. Where is it now? And it'll tell you. And it might say, you know, this part's in this new part of the reg, and this part's in that new part of the reg. So it helps to kind of let people who haven't been, you know, very closely involved in making all these changes negotiate between the old and the new. Private well regulation is pretty short. It's only like 35 pages compared to some regulations, which are a few hundred pages. It's not that complicated, but still it's helpful. So that's one of the things we'll do. I have no doubt that we'll have, you know, guidance materials that we'll share with realtors, with home builders, and so on, to sort of address the question that you're raising. And that kind of brings me to, I guess we have about 15 minutes left. That kind of gives me a segue into something else we're looking at, and that is, you know, as you know, right now, our rail regulations, the only thing they govern is the location and the construction of a private well. They don't, nothing else. After it's approved, the owner is responsible for everything, therefore we have no regulations. And the reason that we don't is that the Code of Virginia doesn't give us any authority for anything else. The Code of Virginia says the Department of Health shall regulate the construction and location of private wells, period. Well, we've been putting a lot of thought into, you know, ongoing water quality standards for private wells. This, you know, what happens, what's been happening, like, well, every day, I'm telling you, every day, we get calls here in the central office. Every local health department gets calls every day, multiple times, from realtors and lending companies saying, "Oh, we're getting ready to close on this house. What does the health department require the water to be tested for?" We say nothing, and they say, "No, you got to be testing for something." I said, "Well, here's our guidance, but it's just guidance, and there's no teeth in it." So that's one thing that happens that's frustrating. But you know, in the last few years, there's been the coal ash ponds at Dominion that have had all this controversy. There have been these pipelines, and we could say, okay, identify all the private wells, you know, within like half a mile. What's the water quality? We say, you have to do a FOIA request, ask based, you know, property by property, because we don't have any way of extracting that information. We don't have that database, and there's no water quality data at all. And so, you know, every year in the General Assembly, there's some bill that goes through that says, you know, Dominion Energy shall test all the private wells within a half mile of this, or the pipeline shall do something with the private wells within, you know, distance of their things. It's the uranium mines. It's, you know, it's always something. Now it's gold mining in Buckingham County. There's all this stuff that people want the groundwater data on. So we don't even have background data available. So we worked on a legislative proposal that we would be hoping to take to, you know, find a patron in the General Assembly to get the code changed to allow some kind of groundwater or some kind of private well water quality testing. You know, they're homeowners. It can't be extensive. It's not going to be like, you know, the city of Richmond water source where they test it, you know, every day for this and once a month for that, and annually for about 1 million chemicals, and then they send out their flyers to everyone saying what's in there. But we have to come up with something. And where we got with this is we thought it was really great, but then we realized, you know, this could be, you know, we don't want to be responsible for creating an unfunded mandate, because just to update our databases, to hold the data, to find, you know, where to enter it, it's like, man, that's going to be like, you know, a few $1 million to the health department just to pay for that. And then we hadn't really talked. I mean, I sort of ran the idea past Christina that we were thinking about it, and would maybe like to talk to the board about it. We, you know, haven't really got feedback from the realtors, from the home builders, you know, so on. So what we're actually proposing right now is to get General Assembly to authorize a study so we can look at this a lot more closely. You know, so that's what we're thinking about. I really am interested to know what what the drillers might think of that. You know, I don't know if it's going to, yeah, it might lead to a little more work because people may find out that their wells are, you know, time for a well inspection. They need to fix things. They need to, you know, replace an O-ring, or, man, you got this and that. So it could lead to more work for you, but it could be a headache too. I don't know. So I'm just kind of curious what drillers might think of such proposal, and whether, you know, if we sit down and have some stakeholder meetings, you know, and they probably could be Zoom like this, with, you know, a wider group of, you know, like I said, the realtors and the builders, and some of our epidemiological folks from VDH and so forth. It'd be, I I just like to plant the seed that it would be really great to have some drilling representation at the table for that too.
So Anthony, I'll follow up. We are interested in having further conversations and kind of diving into it a little bit more, because there has been an ongoing issue with the lack of understanding what a well inspection is when it comes across our plate as from a real estate closing. Where that's really what they were asking for, is a bacterial analysis, which, as you know, really doesn't cover much of anything.
Okay.
So we are open and would love to have more of a conversation with you guys, because it's been a long desire to have an understanding of what a true well inspection is, and then some uniformity and some, as you call it, teeth to being able to implement what a true well inspection is, so that it does inform the homeowners and have a greater understanding of protecting their own water supply and whatnot.
Well, and I don't know if you've ever had any conversations with Valra, but they had a bill in 2020, I think. And I think I tried it a couple of years, where they basically said, for a real estate transaction, if an on-site sewage system is to be inspected, and they got the Code of Virginia changed to say it shall be by an OSE, a PE, one of these, these D4 classifications, that, so that, these, personally, I find these things where, you hire someone to inspect your, these real estate inspectors, and they come and they say, oh yeah, you've got, bad electrical fixture, looks like the roof, they come up with all these things, and they're just people with business cards and pickup trucks a lot of times. And I honestly think, from buying the house I live in now with an inspector that didn't know his butt from an elbow, and when we were trying to sell my parents' house, we actually had an inspector come, and he identified a whole bunch of stuff, and we fixed it and then put it on the market, and like 3 people put offers on it, and then their inspectors found completely different stuff every time. I mean, it's just a racket. So I don't know if if your lobbying presence might try to find a patron to say, hey, water well inspection for a real estate transfer has to be done by a WWSP, period. And it gets, I know there's this area where you got water well systems providers and then plumbers, and there's a lot of, this and where one rule ends and the other begins, but, that's what Valor did, and it worked. You have to be an OSC to do a real estate transfer inspection for a real inspection for an on-site system.
Thank you. I saw Ed had unmuted himself. Mr. Sizemore, did you have another question or comment?
Well, yeah, I guess listening to Mr. Creech's comments, Anthony's comments, just to throw this out, I've come to the conclusion that what these people are interested in for property transfers, the mortgage companies aren't really interested in the water quality. They want to know whether the well system is functional. In other words, are there any, is there any physical damage to the well to keep it from doing what it's supposed to do? And so, basically the only way to find out right now if there's a problem is you do a couple of tests. So, somebody collects a sample, fails the bacteria test. I tell folks, I said, sometimes it takes a couple of treatments in order to get all the bacteria out. But if you fail twice after the initial, so you fail, you get it treated, you fail, you get it treated, you fail again. At that point, I tell folks, all right, you got to get a well professional come in and take a look at this. Now, I think it would be helpful to have like some sort of certification for the folks who are going out and actually doing the physical inspections of the well. But You know, what is it that they're looking for? I guess that you put folks on the driller's side or on the well side of things who would come out and actually physically do it. They should know what they're looking for. And so what are the standards as far as a checklist of what you're supposed to pass or what things, you know, I don't know anything about that. All I know is whether or not people fail and how often they fail. But it certainly seems to me there ought to be more consistency in how these things are approached once a problem has been identified. I don't know if it already exists. Maybe it's just because of my lack of knowledge as far as what happens on the downstream side, but I don't know.
It's
That's
not,
just my thought.
and to thank you, Mr. Sizemore. And that's actually what I was referring to, is that there's not any teeth to what a true well inspection is. There are checklists that multiple contractors either develop on their own, or the Virginia Tech Cooperative Extension Office has created a well checklist that our contractors can participate in. But there's not anything that is a code or regulation or policy set in place that we follow consistently. And that is what I was referring to, is creating and implementing what a true, one, defining what a well inspection is, and then two, to your point, having that checklist, and then who it's provided by, you know, who it's completed by, a professional, you know, contractor. So those are things that the association is very interested in getting established and promoting, just because there is such a misunderstanding of what a well inspection is.
Yeah, and you know, the whole real estate transfer thing is, I think one of the reasons why we think it's good to have like ongoing, at least some sort of regular check of private well quality, is, I'll give you the example of lead. I mean, you get a sample, you check your water, it's got lead in it. More than likely, it's got nothing to do with the well. More than likely, it's the plumbing system within the house. The well may be introducing acidic water that is more likely to leach lead from the lead-free plumbing fittings. But you know, it can be actually really challenging to ultimately determine what the source is. It's never the groundwater, not in Virginia. There's pretty much no lead in naturally in groundwater. I don't think anywhere in Virginia. There may be some mining, if there's lead mining areas, maybe, but you know, there really aren't any there. So, you know, if it's coming from the well, it could be, you know, there's some cases where there may be some galvanized metal in there. That's a source that does exist. I don't think, you know, that's an older kind of problem. But more than likely it's coming from inside the house. And, you know, it's just, you know, I'm sure that there's home deals that blow up because there's lead in the plumbing, and you can't necessarily figure out exactly what the source is without a lot of, you know, additional digging. So, you know,
well, there was a paper that came, a study done up at Virginia Tech a few years ago. A young lady did it, and they looked at samples from different, you know, draw times. You know,
right.
A sample taken immediately, sample taken after 15 seconds of flush, and after a minute of flush. Looking at different sections within that system, and you know, if you're it just, you know, so to get a handle on what you're talking about, you're dramatically increasing the expense of trying to isolate this problem. And you know, I'd like to have your thoughts on what would you recommend as for what's the best approach for trying to get a handle on that?
Well, I know the paper you're talking about, Kelsey Piper's paper, and it is really interesting. You know, you may have to do several rounds of sampling to pin down, okay, you know, this is associated with the faucet itself. You know, there's a fixture in the faucet itself. or no, it's probably associated, might be associated with, you know, like pitless adapter or something like that. And so, you know, in a lot of these cases, if you know, the person runs the water for 10 seconds before they drink it, they're fine. In other cases, not so. And then there's this really strange case where you flush the water and the lead level goes down, and you continue flushing, and then it goes back up again. And that's where the galvanized metal in the well problem is. So it's really,
Well, for most cases, wouldn't an acid neutralizer, like you mentioned, the you know, acid water is aggressive, and so wouldn't you know, I mean, that's what I tell folks if we have a problem. You know, the best solution is to put, you know, install an acid neutralizer. Don't worry about it, but it won't. That wouldn't take care of any kind of galvanized issue inside the well itself. So for I guess, what are the regulations right now as far as what you put in the well? You don't, those, you know, are the galvanized issue, that's an older type well. Modern wells don't have that in there, is it?
Well, no, apparently, and that's why we want to say, you know, we want to make sure that only NSF certified material is put in wells, because apparently, and I just know this anecdotally from talking to Aaron Tisdale, but I think there was some galvanized piping coming from, I think, China. I don't know for sure. And it met ASTM standard, you know, ASTM whatever, but it wasn't NSF. And that stuff was a real, it was a source of lead into water supplies. So, and I think that's a fairly recent thing. So, you know, it's.
Yeah, I would recommend to anybody, don't use stuff coming from China.
Yeah, but you know, we put a lot of trust in the NSF because that they're pretty rigorous, and you can't just get that once and then rest on your laurels. You have to get it renewed every year. So you know, that's kind of where we are with that.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I don't want to cut us short, but I do want to be responsible for everyone's work day. I appreciate your time and coming in and speaking with us today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to send them to me. I will get them to Anthony. And we do appreciate participation, and we'll get that link out.
I will get you that link, and I got to hunt it down myself, and then I'll just cut and paste it and email it to you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. I thought this was really good.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.